I just want to do a brief video about recognizing what God is doing, recognizing the move of God, recognizing what God is doing in our day, and recognizing who God is doing it through. You see, it's easy to recognize what God has done in the past. It's easy to look back and say, yes, we could see that God was using Martin Luther. We can see that God was using William Tyndale. We can see that God was using John Wesley, and we can see that God was using George Whitefield, etc., etc. Even in the days of Jesus, the scribes and Pharisees could recognize Moses and Elijah and Isaiah and Jeremiah. They could recognize the people that were being used in the past, but they couldn't recognize Jesus, who was in the present. And nothing has changed. People have no problem recognizing the moves of God in the past, but what they do have a problem with is recognizing who and where God is moving in the present. Even with Jesus, people can recognize Jesus from the Bible. They recognize his ministry. They recognize what he did. They acknowledge what he did. But can they recognize what Jesus is doing today in the earth? Do they see where Jesus is moving today? Because Jesus hasn't stopped working. He's still working today in the same way that he was working when he was in the earth, in the flesh. The only difference today is that he's working through people. He's doing the same thing he did when he was on the earth, but today he's doing it through others. This is what Jesus said. He said, I give you all authority. I'm leaving, so I'm leaving you behind to continue the work. So when God does a work in the earth, he does it through people. He uses people to do his work. His work continues through his followers. So we can expect to see people being used in the earth to continue his work. And the thing that we will also expect to see, because we saw it around Jesus, and we see it around people like Luther, we see it around people like people like Wesley and Whitefield, what we will see around those whom God is using in the earth is controversy, contention, and persecution. Jesus was persecuted. Wherever Jesus went, there was persecution. He was attacked. He was criticized. People said false things about him. They claimed that he did things by Beelzebub. They claimed that he was demon-possessed. They made up stories about him. All manner of things were said about Jesus. And you can imagine that Luther was attacked by the church of the day. Wesley and Whitefield were attacked. So wherever God is moving, we can expect to see a storm around those who he's using. And I don't believe it's any different today. We see there are people that God has raised up in this day, that he's sent to equip the church, to prepare the church, to bring about change. Don't forget that people like Whitefield, Wesley, and Luther and the Reformers were sent by God to bring about a change in the church, to bring about a reformation or a restoration of things that had been lost. So men that are sent today to bring about a restoration and a reformation in the church, we will expect to see them have the same sort of a storm of controversy and attack around them that people in the past had. Unfortunately, many people in the church don't recognize this. They don't recognize what God is doing in the present. They don't recognize change. They would have recognized, or they will acknowledge the men of the past, but they won't recognize or acknowledge the people of the present who God is using. But there isn't another method that God is going to use. God will move through people. He sends people. And Jesus says that if we have to receive the ones he sends, and if we receive the ones he sends, we are receiving him. and his ministry into our lives. When we reject the ones that he sends, we are rejecting him and what he's doing. And so I'm just bringing this to you there, and to just point this principle out, because there is a large section of the church that has chosen to reject what God is doing. And some sections of the church have been rejecting successive moves of the Spirit in these days. And so now they are finding themselves 2 or 3 steps behind what God is doing. And they are finding themselves in opposition to what God is doing in this day, which is obviously not a good place to be. So I want to encourage you to re-examine your heart, to ask God to reveal to you who it is that God is using in these days. And should you be actually listening to the people that God is using in these days? Well, you may say, well, these people, that God uses, that you're saying that God uses today, have faults. Well, they may well have faults. You will say, well, there's some things that aren't correct about what they teach. Well, they may be. But that was the same for Wesley. That was the same for Whitefield. That was the same for Luther. God uses people, and people aren't perfect. Especially at the beginning of any movement that God does, because they're kind of, they're forerunners, they're pioneers, they're breaking, new ground, they're establishing things or re-establishing things that have been lost for a long time. They're coming out of a system and into a new, coming out of our old wineskin into a new wineskin. So I'm just laying this out there because, progress involves change. It doesn't mean to say that truth changes, because, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, But if you just go on the basis that, we don't ever need to learn anything, we don't need to ever get anything new, then you would say, well, we didn't need a Reformation. On that basis, we didn't need a Reformation. And the Reformation wasn't complete. The Reformation was not a full restoration of the church. In fact, it carried over many of the same problems into the church that were already there before. It just gave them different names and labels, but it actually had some of the same faulty issues that were already in the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, just carried on under different labels. It didn't fully restore and reform the church to what it was in its early days. It only partially restored it. It rejected some things from the Catholic Church that it could have held on to. So the Reformation was partial, which is why we see a continuing work of God. It talks in Acts about the restoration of all things, and that the glory of the latter house will be greater than the glory of the former house. Because God has to restore what is lost before he returns. And we need what was lost in order to accomplish what we need in these last days. Because the church has been, you have to understand the battle. If you don't understand that the church has been in a battle for 2,000 years, then you don't see what's gone on. We see clearly the church was birthed in Jerusalem. And then, from then on, it was in constant battle. First from without, through persecution, and then from within, through corruption and false teaching. And so this battle has waged back and forth for 2,000 years. But gradually, in the last 100 years, God has been restoring and putting back into place. We had the Reformation, which was a major watershed. And gradually God is restoring and building in things to the church and bringing the church forward. But unfortunately, there are still large sections of the church that are not embracing what God is doing and actually rejecting what God is doing. So this is an appeal to those to think carefully, to think about who is it who is at the centre of the controversies today, and why. And so I think I'm going to leave it there. It's this may seem a bit vague, but I'm sure that those who will understand what I'm saying. There will be those who understand exactly what I'm saying. And so I'm going to leave it there. I'd be interested in any comments. Please, if you've got any comments, I'll be happy to look at them. So God bless and have a good day.